When I married Malcolm Price at 29, it was in a modest courthouse in Atlanta filled with late afternoon sunlight and the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with lilies. I believed I had found something rare. A partner who remembered waiters' names, sent his cousin articles about astronomy at 2 in the morning, and could flip an omelette with unshakable calm. He was 35, soft-spoken, the kind of man who listened so intently you'd hear yourself telling truths you hadn't said aloud before. What I hadn't accounted for in my happily ever after equation was his mother. I first met Evelyn Price in her sprawling garden on the edge of a wealthy neighborhood in Buckhead. Her flower beds looked arranged by a magazine stylist, layered with old Southern confidence and unspoken rules. Evelyn was 59, elegant pearl studs in her ears, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face like a halo. She trimmed her hydrangeas with silver shears that gleamed whenever she turned her wrist. She studied me like I was a house up for appraisal, not unworthy, just in need of classification. "Danielle, isn't it?" she said, the way a jeweler tests a stone for flaws. "So, you're the one. Not cruel. At least not openly." Evelyn specialized in sentences wrapped in velvet but lined with grit. "That color is bold," she would murmur about a dress. "You're efficient," she'd remark, pausing just long enough to make the words sound like a performance review. I tried. Of course I tried. I learned her tea preferences. 1 slice of lemon, no sugar, steeped for exactly 3 minutes. I praised her flowers. I memorized stories from Malcolm's childhood summer trips and his trumpet recitals. I laughed at the right moments. I told myself every family has a constellation, bright, untouchable, and impossible to ignore. Back in Atlanta, our small loft above an old record shop felt like oxygen. I worked as a program coordinator at a contemporary art center, my sanctuary of bold installations and ideas louder than the walls, while Malcolm built apps and curated playlists for our Friday cooking nights. We danced in the kitchen between pots and pans, our hips brushing as Al Green played. Love lived here daily, simple and unpolished. Then came the Saturday gathering at Evelyn's. For her, casual lunch meant valet parking and a hired saxophonist in the living room. The air smelled faintly of citrus and polished oak. Guests floated in, neighbors, cousins, a partner from her preferred law office. Their names slipped off me like rain on glass. I was in the middle of a polite chat about someone's trip to Morocco when Evelyn glided toward me, perfume like jasmine sharpened with intent. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder and announced to the circle, bright as a chandelier, "This is Danielle. She's our chef tonight." Time stalled. Laughter bubbled politely, and eyes flicked to my hands as though expecting me to appear with a tray. I smiled because my face didn't know what else to do. The saxophone played on as if nothing had tilted. Malcolm was outside debating basketball stats with his uncle. Inside, I floated through syrup-thick small talk, the word chef stapled to my name like a label I hadn't agreed to wear. I fetched dishes without thinking. Sometimes your body accepts the role assigned before your mind can protest. That night driving home, I stared out the window as streetlights striped the dashboard. I imagined telling Malcolm and hearing, "That's just Mom." Instead, I stayed quiet and tucked the memory into a private notebook inside myself. People misspeak at parties, I told myself. Maybe chef was Evelyn's way of saying domestic goddess. Sure. And maybe the roses trimmed themselves. At the art center, I inhaled the clean tang of paint and fresh spackle in the prep studio, reading wall text aloud to hear the rhythm land right. A team paused before a sculpture built from shattered porcelain plates, eyes wide, as if the broken pieces were singing to each other. On my lunch break, I sat on the loading ramp with the sun warming my boots while a cyclist whirred past, gears ticking like a metronome. Here I wasn't an accessory. I was a verb. Evelyn's presence arrived with the regularity of junk mail. Glossy, uninvited, relentless. She dropped by with peach cobbler and conducted tours of our bookshelves as if curating an exhibit of my life. Cozy, she'd declare about our loft. A word said the way you describe a cardigan you bought on clearance. Malcolm, kind as ever, carried a soft blind spot labeled Mama. He saw philanthropy, church teas, her gentle jokes with servers and nieces. He didn't see the quiet edits in my margins, how my title kept getting downgraded like a seat assignment. One Sunday she slid a cobbler across the counter and said, "Andre's old room looks just the same, you know. You two could save so much staying with me for a while." The smile beneath it translated to, "I've already redecorated your future." Still, we had a flood of easy days. Tuesday tacos dressed with too much lime, late-night movies with alternate endings, a weekend in Savannah where we forgot our phones in a drawer and remembered each other instead. Our marriage wasn't under siege. It just came with a gated annex, and the annex had rules. A few weeks after the chef christening, Evelyn hosted what she called lunch and what turned out to be a 3-course script with assigned roles. She cast the neighbor as the charming curmudgeon, the family friend as laugh track, the attorney as confessor. Dessert arrived lacquered like a jewel. Then she softened the room with her voice. When Malcolm was 13, he brought home a stray cat. Guess who did all the feeding? Her gaze slid to me. Some things don't change. Polite chuckles. I added mine to the pile, a pebble tossed into a river already rushing. Inside me, a thin sliver settled deeper. Driving home, I pocketed reasons to let it go. This isn't a battlefield. It's family. You're tired. But later, zesting a lemon over a bowl, I could feel the steady rasp of her edits. Not just of me, but of the preface to us. A white satin ribbon box arrived, her looping handwriting on the card. Malcolm set it on the table like it might be a neutral object. Inside lay 4 snow-bright aprons, embroidered in gold with a single initial. Not P for Price. Not D for Danielle. Not even M for Malcolm. E. I folded them with museum care and slid them into a drawer. The fabric held a whisper of lavender and ownership. That evening, while onions softened and Sam Cooke promised change on the radio, I mentioned the aprons. Thoughtful, Malcolm ventured. The labels, I said lightly. He kissed the top of my head. We ate, washed dishes, closed the drawer. The thought did not close with it. Some people are undone by an earthquake, others by a steady rain. I was being rained on. On a Tuesday, Evelyn called with sugared concern. What's for dinner? When Malcolm was growing up, there was always a hot plate waiting. I suppose times are different. I watched my reflection in the phone's dark glass and answered evenly. They are. We share the cooking. A beat. Of course, dear. How modern. Thursday brought a fundraiser in a downtown ballroom where the lighting glazed everyone with extra shine. Evelyn introduced me to a board member with a guiding hand at my elbow. This is Malcolm's lovely wife. She keeps him so organized. Not partner. Not curator. Something closer to a walking calendar. Saturday we were summoned for supper. I wore storm green silk and shoes I could survive in all night. At the door, her gaze made its inventory. You've made such an effort, she said, smile sugar-glazed. I always do, I answered, equally glazed. A flicker moved behind her eyes, quick as a fish. I began mapping the geography of her speech. Compliment. Pause. Qualification. Admiration. Edit. Cement. A choreography practiced until it looked spontaneous, a ruffle of feathers that left you unsure whether you'd imagined the draft. During dinner she sang, Danielle is our better half, though she insists on staying busy. I smiled. I call it living a full life. The table hummed, rearranging me in their margins. Evelyn's gaze lingered a touch too long, a needle poised above cloth. After that, the weather calmed. Fewer drop-ins, a measured text here and there, a bouquet delivered to the arts center with a card, so proud of your little show. I pinched the bridge of my nose and laughed because sometimes laughter is the only solvent strong enough to loosen a certain kind of glue. Then came a second package. Linen napkins, monogrammed with the same uncompromising E, the font stiff as a fence. I placed them beside the aprons. My drawer was evolving into a museum dedicated to someone else's initials. Around then, an idea began, less a plan than a shadow. I set it down. It returned, patient as a cat. The tipping point wasn't an explosion. It was a single sentence at a backyard gathering where gin floated in lemonade and dragonflies stitched the humid air. Evelyn draped an arm around me for a neighbor's benefit and declared, "Isn't she wonderful? Takes such good care of Malcolm, like our very own house cook." The neighbor smiled. I did too. But inside, the shadow I'd been ignoring sat up and stretched. That night, while rinsing wine glasses as Malcolm scrolled for a playlist, I caught a glimpse of the apron's gold E peeking through the drawer's thin seam. I wiped a clean counter as if removing a stain that didn't exist. My mind replayed a museum label I once wrote. Artist refuses the frame assigned to her. Back then, I'd called it brave. Now, it felt necessary. Resolve doesn't always arrive with a parade. Mine showed up as a knot tightening quietly inside my chest. I started making small recalibrations. "Let's meet at Juniper Cafe instead," I'd suggest when Evelyn proposed a visit, neutral territory where the presence of a waiter softened her tone. Sometimes I added, "Why not come to our place this time?" handing control back to our tiny kingdom of second-hand furniture and first-rate playlists. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But friction makes heat. And heat makes light. At one dinner, Evelyn offered another gentle demotion. "This is Danielle. She keeps everything running for Malcolm." I smiled brightly at a cousin. "Actually, I run contemporary programs at the Arts Center downtown." Then I added, teasing, "And Malcolm plays my sous chef on Fridays." Laughter, warm and real, filled the table. The cousin leaned in, curious about the exhibit. Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction, then smoothed over, seamless again, but a seam had been revealed. In the quiet of our loft, I thought about scale. Drama can scorch the earth but burns out fast. Subtlety, though, that lingers. I didn't want a war. I wanted the map redrawn. Then came Evelyn's birthday invitation. Thick cream paper, hand-lettered, a faint watermark of lilies. The kind of stationery that implied a seating chart was already tattooed on destiny. An unforgettable evening, it promised. I traced the word with my finger. Unforgettable is a dare. In the weeks that followed, I lived conspicuously as myself. I wrote wall text for the fall exhibition. Ceramics cracked open like planets revealing molten cores. I biked to work. I taught myself to make chili oil and licked the spoon as if discovering fire for the first time. Malcolm, weighed down by deadlines, still came home smiling, sniffing tomatoes to tell if they were ripe by scent rather than color. Evelyn texted a photo of a centerpiece trial. Pale roses floating in a glass trough. Thoughts. I typed stunning, then deleted it. Wrote instead, "They're beautiful. Maybe add something unexpected. Rosemary sprigs so the room smells like gardens and dinners." She replied, "We'll see." Translation. "Thank you for the menu notes, chef." The morning of the party, I ironed a dress the shade of deep water, drew a steady line of eyeliner, and tucked a slim envelope into my bag. The kind you use for a gift. Or a reckoning. Malcolm drove. The radio murmured. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm very okay," I answered, and realized I was telling the truth. We turned into the driveway. The house blazed with light. Inside, chandeliers rehearsed their sparkle. Guests arranged themselves like stage sets. A pianist's fingers rippled, making the room feel expensive. Evelyn floated through it all like a conductor. When she reached me, she looped an arm through mine. "You look almost scandalously elegant," she whispered, then turned to a couple with a charitable foundation. "This is Danielle, our family's secret to hosting." "Your chef," the woman guessed, cheerful but unhelpful. "Our everything," Evelyn answered smoothly. "Perfect. Practiced." The room shimmered on. My pulse slowed, not to panic, but to precision. I had chosen my tempo. Dinner unfolded like theater, each course delivered as if rehearsed applause. I filled the spaces with stories of summer storms that twisted through Georgia, of an exhibit that persuaded a rancher to love sculpture. I sprinkled details deliberately. People remember details. Beneath the table, Malcolm tapped my knee twice in quiet Morse code. You're doing fine. I'm here. Across the glow of candles, Evelyn watched me the way a general studies weather, calculating, waiting for a shift in the wind. Dessert arrived, a custard trembling like a verdict. Then the sharp tap-tap-tap of a spoon against crystal. The room quieted. Evelyn rose, radiant in candlelight and her own narrative. She thanked donors, charmed old friends, retold family stories polished to shine. The dog that chewed a suit cuff, the church raffle pie that nobody could resist, the ski trip that stranded them halfway up a lift. She stitched charity and legacy into one seamless monologue. And then she passed the thread to me. And now, a few words from Danielle, who always helps make nights like this so effortless. The room turned toward me as if velvet curtains had just parted. I stood, lifted my glass, and spoke in a warm register where truth can land without breaking. Evelyn, happy birthday. You gather people beautifully. You've taught me that hosting isn't just logistics, it's choreography. Candles low enough so we see each other's eyes. Music soft enough so laughter has room to live. I've learned a great deal from you. Her face lit with graceful satisfaction. This was the mirror she loved most. I let the pause stretch. Then. And I learned something I didn't expect. At my first family gathering here, I was introduced as the cook. Not small, not shameful, but titles matter. They can be instruments, or they can be cages. A ripple moved through silverware. So I decided to be exact with mine. I'm Malcolm's wife. I direct contemporary programs at the Arts Center. And yes, I love cooking with him. For friends, for joy, for the love of heat and salt. That's not a cage. That's a choice. A few nods. A gentle laugh. My glass lifted higher. So here's to the woman who taught me how to arrange a room, and accidentally, how to rearrange my own story. For a heartbeat, silence clung to the room. Then applause rose, polite, then warm, then real. A guest whispered, "Well said." The pianist leaned into a major chord. Malcolm's smile reached his eyes. Evelyn's face remained flawless, but something beneath it flickered and cooled, like a filament dimming after a surge of light. I sat down. My chest opened as though a door had swung toward night air. The custard that followed tasted brighter. Conversation flowed again, but with new angles. A board member asked me about an artist. A neighbor confessed she hated roses. Too perfect. Like a polite person with no opinions. And across the table, the lawyer who always chuckled at me as if I were a joke now studied me with something like recalculation. Evelyn did not correct me. She did not reclaim the microphone. That was the victory, not humiliation, not spectacle, just a title restored to its rightful owner. We left beneath strings of lawn lights and the sound of crickets. In the car, Malcolm squeezed my hand once, then twice. "That was exactly you," he murmured. "Exactly," I answered, exhaling. The aprons remained folded in their drawer, untouched as a truce. Days stitched themselves back together. Deadlines at the Arts Center, rain that smelled like copper pennies, a Sunday morning when we burned the toast and ate it anyway. When Evelyn called, her voice carried the same silk, but the lining was different. "Danielle runs programs at the Arts Center," she would now say on speakerphone. "And she and Malcolm make a mean jambalaya together." Almost sweet. Almost funny. Almost. A week after her birthday, I sent a package. Not revenge. Curation. Inside a plain brown box, tied with navy ribbon, I placed 3 things. First, a signed copy of Vertami Smart Grosvenor's Vibration Cooking, found in a tucked-away shop near Decatur. The dust jacket was softened at the corners. Loved before. Inside, on Arts Center stationery, I wrote, "Cooking is a love language. Thank you for speaking it so loudly that night I nearly lost my own voice. I prefer a duet." Second, an invoice I typed cleanly on crisp paper, borrowing my Arts Center's letterhead. Line items read, "Menu consultation, $0. Boundary clarification. Priceless. Title restoration. Paid in full." At the bottom, No further payment due. Third, a certificate printed on heavy stock, a donation made in Evelyn Price's name to a culinary scholarship at Atlanta Community College. The amount was modest but meaningful, enough to help a young cook find a kitchen without gates. 2 days later, a text. The book is exquisite. The invoice made me laugh. The scholarship is thoughtful. Lunch soon. I stared at her words and saw the tug of war in the pauses. Pride, surprise, calculation, maybe even a flicker of tenderness. We met at Juniper Cafe, neutral ground. She arrived in camel and pearls. We ordered trout, spoke of knife skills and how many restaurants collapse under their own debts. She did not mention the aprons. Neither did I. Between bites, she asked me about an artist, and listened as though the answer mattered. When we parted, she hugged me, brief, crisp, as if we were rehearsing a new dance. On the bus ride home, the city moved like a patient animal. I watched the lights blur and texted Malcolm a photo of the empty ribbon. He replied with a chef emoji and a heart. I sent back a picture frame. Life afterward tilted into a different rhythm, like a song finally corrected to the right tempo. The applause from my toast still echoed in me. Not loud, not flashy, just steady enough to remind me that once truth is spoken, it doesn't crawl back into its box. Evelyn never called me the cook again. She introduced me with precision, my daughter-in-law Danielle, who runs the Art Center's programs. But I could always hear the pause, the carefulness that hadn't been there before. She knew now that titles mattered, and that I wasn't afraid to claim mine. Months later she sent a photo, a young woman in a chef's jacket, grinning wide. Our first scholarship student, the caption read. I smiled too. I wasn't just the cook. I was the curator, the wife, the woman who had chosen her own title. And Evelyn, whether she liked it or not, finally knew it. In the end, Danielle didn't win through battle or surrender. She won by choosing her own frame. What once felt like a drizzle of quiet dismissals became the spark that pushed her to define herself, not as Evelyn's cook, but as her own curator, partner, and storyteller. And though Evelyn never admitted defeat, her silence spoke louder than any correction. Some titles are borrowed, others are stolen, but the ones you claim for yourself? Those last forever.